Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Nos encontramos nuevamente en esta última tarde de estas jornadas dobles sobre Deleuze y Guattari. En esta ocasión tenemos nuestra segunda invitada virtual. En este caso se trata de Dorothea OLKOWSKI, quien no solamente es una de las pioneras en los estudios deleuzianos a nivel global, sino además nosotros consideramos parte de estas jornadas de Ontología Práctica. Ella tuvo la amabilidad de acercarse cuando estas jornadas recién arrancaban en su primera edición y hacernos sentir que la colaboración internacional podía ser no solo académica, sino también amistosa, afectiva, alegre y un motivo de celebración. Así que bueno, estuvo en las primeras, estuvo en las terceras y por cuestiones de salud no pudo acercarse hasta aquí en esta ocasión, pero tenemos la fortuna de poder contar con ella en forma virtual. So Dorothea, I told you how you are for us a part of these jornadas.
Thank you.
Not only a great academic, but a great friend. So that we're very happy to be able to listen to you. So when you're ready, you can start. The idea is like half an hour of talk and then...
About half an hour, yes. I cut this out of a larger paper that has not yet been published on the relationship of Deleuze's innovation to his cosmology. And so I'm leaving out sort of the background pieces that are for the article that will be published. But when I started working on this, I realized that even from my earliest work, I've always been working on this idea of innovation, creation, what makes it possible to create something new. Is it possible? How does Deleuze do it? What are what does he use to make this possible? So, the first section is called What is a Dynamical System? What makes the mathematical dynamical system so attractive to Deleuze? Why does he choose it as the leading image of the organization of thought and the emblem of creativity? Dynamical systems have been used to model everything from the motion of planets to the engineering of buildings to the structure of neurons in the brain. Mathematically, dynamical systems are organized by an attractor which acts like a whirlpool that draws movement from the system in its direction. A fixed point attractor has a single definite destination, but where its trajectory ends depends on where it starts, with very different pathways for even minutely different starting points. It's like getting on a slide. Once on it, you stay till the end, although in this example, there are a lot of different slides to choose from. Once a system is oriented by a second type of attractor called a limit cycle, it remains there in its circuitry, repeating itself in an endless repetition like a pendulum that swings eternally. Finally, there are the so-called strange attractors. They are like strings of yarn that wind over and over one another in a messed up circuit without ever making immediate contact with another strand of the yarn. These interest Deleuze because their periodic orbits are unstable. Their pathways act as repellers rather than attractors. And if the system's motion is even minutely perturbed, the strange attractor pushes it even further away from the path or orbit, like a pendulum pushed off its upper attachment. The rules governing the system do not alter. They are and remain deterministic, yet the motions resulting from strange attractors are unpredictable, contingent, random. Another term for strange attractors is the more familiar word, chaos. We can see that the three-body problem is a version of this, where three bodies are in unstable orbits in relation to one another until one of them is pushed away. There are limits to what we can and should expect from nature by means of dynamical system. A totally chaotic, structurally unstable world would not support living beings, as evolutionary adaptation would have no chance to take hold. Some amount of stability is necessary for life. So we can ask if and how instability takes advantage of nature's contingencies for the sake of creation. Discontinuity and difference are evidence in breaking waves and financial markets, where too many inputs confuse and disrupt the output. The quintessential mathematical manifestation of instability is that of the catastrophe, the shift from merely unstable situation to one whose inputs are so disruptive as to shift the outcome onto an entirely new region with a different attractor. The mathematician René Thom is famous for introducing this concept, although he was also reviled by others who denied it as a reality. In the extreme, a catastrophe might amount to what Deleuze calls a black hole, something too disorganized and tumultuous to be able to be of use. More limited versions of catastrophes, versions that are not completely destructive, seem to take place occasionally. Anyone can visualize the simplest of these catastrophes by making a sharp S curve out of a flat piece of paper. This is your homework. And envisioning something falling from the top upper right-hand edge of the curve to a surface below it, bypassing all the other surfaces that would have broken its fall. This cusp catastrophe has been applied to everything from competing political ideologies to the collapse of civilizations. It envisions the move from an unstable political or economic situation to one whose parameters are yet to be defined, and so may turn out to be quite problematic. Given this risk, deterministic chaos, as described above, is perhaps a less dangerous way to accomplish the creation of something new. We see Deleuze by and large taking this route when he states that every domain of interest is oriented by an idea, an n-dimensional, continuous, defined multiplicity, where dimensions refer to variables upon which a phenomena depends, and continuity is a set of relations between changes in these variables. The important thing here is continuity. But what gives this structure an element of contingency lies in the undefined number and type of dimensions and the elements that populate them. The general orientation of the field is organized by an attractor, generally a fixed attractor, which for the philosopher is an idea. Ideas may be social, psychological, economic, biological, chemical, physical, and so on. We can see how this is the start of a variable structure that permits the unanticipated arrival of the new without the threat of complete collapse, the black hole. Of course, many situations defined by changes in variables may amount to nothing. So we want to look more closely at what works to the advantage of the creation of something new. I'm skipping a section here on neuroscience. Creation and images is this section. In Mind Energy, Henri Bergson suggests that we are mistaken when we presume that the dream state is a substratum of the normal state of mind. In fact, he argues, the reality of the waking state is obtained by a limitation of the dream state, by concentration and tensing the otherwise diffuse psychical dream life. Quote, there does consciousness disport itself, perceiving just to perceive, remembering just to remember, with no care for life, that is, for the action to be accomplished. End quote. Cease to will and you pass into the dream state. But the downside is that this state imitates that of insanity. Other states do this as well. These include a lasting intoxication that alters the chemicals affecting brain tissue, such as that left by certain infectious diseases, lesions between the frontal and parietal lobes that can produce a loss of movement, damage to the visual cortex, and the visual word-forming area behind the ear, which account for image and word recognition, respectively. In each case, the mechanism of the brain is thrown out of gear, out of line with reality, out of line with action, and new evidence confirms, as Bergson argued, that even words come to be recognized as images. On the other hand, there are also abnormal states that appear to add something to normal life. Delirium, hallucinations, and obsession introduce new ways of thinking and feeling. And in this case, no psychical state disappears, but all are affected. But also in this case, the abnormal state is prevented from emerging sooner due to the inhibitory effect of attention to life, which eliminates and corrects various brain functions in search of equilibrium. When and wherever this is relaxed, symptoms arise, symptoms that have been waiting for the opportunity to present themselves. Thus, the task of psychology, according to Bergson, is to explain why there are not more disordered minds, and even why all minds are not disordered. Possibly this is even more the case if we consider the opening of Matter and Memory, where we are asked to find ourselves in the presence of images prior to any conceptualization or representation. Is this a little piece of chaos linked to creation? And is it possible to have just a little piece of chaos to explore? A brain that says, I feel, and I is another, as well as I conceive and I think. Deleuze's Cinema 2, the time image, takes up the Bergsonian ideal of images surrounded by a world. Actual images, recollection images, dream images, and world images surrounded by a world. Actual images. Organized from the most contracted to the most expansive. The entry into images brings us not to a subject of perception who acts, but more likely to a brain, to what Deleuze refers to as attentive recognition. Attentive recognition abandons perception, selects only certain provisional features that may be displaced or replaced, and so abstracts from the action-oriented perception of a thing. In the films that interest Deleuze, such as Marcel Carné's Daybreak, attentive recognition is produced as the pure optical image. The character played by Jean Gabin knows that he's going to be rounded up by the police for having committed a murder, but he no longer knows how to react or is no longer able to react because optical or sound images call up recollection images that stifle him. They are the source of what we call flashbacks, although they are more than this. And insofar as they reflect his destiny, they justify his demise as they carry the tragic hero away to the depths of time. The actual and virtual images reflect one another, so that it ceases to be possible to say which is first. This works well enough in film, but does it function similarly when we are talking about the brain? That is, can the brain sidestep its own subject who perceives and acts? Cosmologically and in engineering, the instability of fields of particles or interacting bodies, as well as the catastrophic fall to a completely new manifold enacted by the strange attractor, does happen, sometimes with devastating results. To what extent does it show itself in human behavior? And if it does, is it something to be cautious about? Bergson and Deleuze argue that memory expands along with recollections, dreams, and thoughts, so that an image passes through an infinite number of planes or circuits, yielding a mental vision, which may be obliterated by another circuit that creates yet another mental image, and so constitutes layers and layers of one and the same physical reality. This is not the reality of the perception action circuit, but something completely other, possibly something completely new. Minimally, there's a whole new sense of subjectivity, an extreme redefining of subjectivity, no longer an agent of perception, but only a temporal and spiritual feeling. It occurs when a multiplicity of brain circuits transit zones of recollection and return to a deeper state of the present situation, exceeding all recollections. This is not subjective imagining, which is always juxtaposed to the objectively real, and it's not a function of association of ideas. As Bergson argues, it is the past brought forward, and it happens only if we place ourselves within it, by following and adopting the movement by which it expands and emerges from darkness to light. As Deleuze clarifies, the recollection of the person met last week or last year in a particular place occurs only when I place myself within the recollection. Deleuze recognizes the films of Orson Welles as typical of those where such recollection occurs. Citizen Kane catches up in depth. In Citizen Kane, Kane catches up in depth with a friend he will break with by moving in the past, plunging into the past, so that it is in the past that he himself moves. Yet for the most part, reaching into the pure past of pure recollection is a failure. It's a failure of the sensory motor mechanism and a failure of present perception to link up with a motor image or even a recollection image, which is not the deeper state of pure recollection, akin to the dream image, the past in general. As is the case with many failures, Deleuze finds this one to be creative, a free link to other kinds of images, déjà vu, the past in general, fantasies, theater, dream images, disturbances of memory, and failures of recognition. Bergson's fascination with disturbances of the brain and its failures provides the key to this success. Amnesia, hypnosis, hallucination, madness, visions, nightmares, and dreams all may play a role. All these disturbances break with the action image and break with a coherent perception. They form a sort of automatic subjectivity in contrast to the action-oriented subjectivity of perception. In cinema, characters can be shown to be involved in an accident, sleeping, dreaming, lost, threatened, extremely stressed, barely alive in a state so severe as to be severed from even ordinary memory, from habit, and from attentive recognition. Nothing corresponds to these states except the pure past. The past in general moving at dizzying speed and responding to the character's dream state, a state in which the character is powerless to act but exists only within the circuit of pure recollection akin to the unconscious. Who among us wants to risk this? Is this not, as Bergson points out, mentally and emotionally disruptive? Yet, Deleuze seems to imply that if we cling to recollection images where we can be assured of not being subject to social and intellectual criticism or worse, then we are not fully engaging our creative capacity. Possibly there's no need of proceeding in this risky way, as it's not the same as hallucinating or taking a drug that would make us numb to the external world of perception and action. Perhaps it's more a matter of disregarding the call of the world to act, to be right, and so to risk a little stupidity. Perhaps it amounts to disregarding temporarily or from time to time what we know, to envision or sense something new. But this also implies that the former acute perceiver may themselves become something new, and at least some of their perceptions and possible actions will thereby be altered, and not always in ways that will be appreciated and celebrated, or even reluctantly accepted, and not always in ways that are creative. And there's always the risk of self-delusion. What if this type of suspension is akin to that occurring recently on chatbots, for which certain methods of information gathering and certain methods of persistent questioning produce hallucinations and lies? Even when artificial intelligence functions effectively by taking advantage of a vast, nearly infinite set of memories, in the end, it produces generalized secondary or tertiary manifestations of pirated originals. This section is called Stupidity. With respect to the human brain's relation to perception, as Bergson points out, quote, it's The same psychical life, therefore, must be supposed to be repeated an endless number of times on the different stories of memories, and the same act of mind may be performed at varying heights, end quote. It may happen that the mind frees itself from current images. Sorry, I just lost my place. The problem with iPads, right? It may happen that the mind frees itself from current actions and so may do what it likes in relation to present or absent objects. Sometimes the body ceases to adopt the appropriate attitude and cannot call up the memory that would allow it to act correctly for a given situation. Or the memories themselves are not meeting the call of perception. Bergson links these failures to various pathologies, but Deleuze takes them to be the effect of weak or disjoined connections between optical or sound sensation or perception and a total dream image, the largest circuit of the brain. This allows the virtual image to actualize in a different image, which itself can be actualized in another, and so on and so on. Given the key role that the ideas of Charles Peirce play in the cinema books, it's interesting that although this pattern seems to correspond to what Peirce has called thirdness, Deleuze lets the reader do the work of making that connection. Given the frequency with which this occurs in Deleuze's work, it has the element of being a deliberate technique, a way of leaving an opening for the reader and another possible avenue of creativity. What can we make of pursuing thirdness? Thirdness is a matter of thought and meaning or interpretation. It is mental operations such as the laws of dynamics, which predict how bodies will move after forces have been defined. For Peirce, this makes thought an active factor in the real world, one that may modify laws. The interpretant, the third element of semiosis, acts as a sign or representamen, a first, to determine another interpretant, another third, through the same object, which he calls a second, and so on. Thirdness has the character of generality, which Deleuze refers to as the, quote, exchange or substitution of particulars, each of which can be replaced by any other particular idea which resembles it in relation to a given word, end quote. Deleuze makes use of the mathematical to formulate ideas that are incarnated in real relations and carried over into problems in the form of solutions, as he says. But this chosen mathematical instrument, differential calculus, also makes it difficult to locate it in what he calls the, quote, Platonic evidence of a dialectic superior to mathematics, end quote. Deleuze constructs this dialectic with Peirce by distinguishing the idea of justice, thirdness, as the ground, the generality, the differentials of thought. Then the quality of justice, firstness, Deleuze's concept of intensity, and finally, the object of the claim possessed by that which grounds, that which is incarnated in its just claimants, secondness or representation, each of which is organized by the idea of justice. Deleuze then correlates his use of the mathematical phase space filled with trajectories with Peirce's concept of continuity. For Peirce, continuity is generality understood as conformity to an idea. But the continuum is super multitudinous collection, exceeding all existence, and so great that units lose identity and become indistinct. Deleuze calls this the ideal community, an ideal community, and solutions to problems are a rupture of this continuity. It is all that is possible, the virtuality or continuity through which all states of affairs, insofar as they come into existence, will do so. For Peirce, as for Deleuze, the structure is not merely linguistic, it is cosmological. As the elements of the semiotic account for the impact of language, the real, and the cosmological character of thirdness, which includes every possible quality. Deleuze does not, of course, use the word thirdness, but instead uses the word repetition in active and passive syntheses. Yet it is an open version of thirdness, an unending evolution that repetition forms a rich domain of signs, and those signs gave rise to ideas, which are subject in turn to an infinite regress, a becoming that can continue to infinity. In cinema too, Deleuze offers examples of films where this becoming shows itself, such as when city lights become a pile of cigarettes, which become columns of a Greek temple, then a silo and a chessboard turn into a view of the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Thus, it is characterized as a film technique, or possibly a technique that could be extended to other visual and performing arts, at least to some degree. At the same time, Deleuze offers an alternative creative method. For the brain, the image does not only expand into larger and larger circuits, it also contracts into the smallest circuits, internal limits and mental flashbacks, which serve as the double or virtual mirror reflection of the actual image. It thereby creates its own object, the real and the imaginary, the present and the past, one image with two sides, each of which is totally reversible in relation to the other. Elsewhere, Deleuze refers to this type of structure as that of sense, which does not exist outside of the proposition that expresses it in the act of denoting a thing or state of affairs. Sense is a system turned in one direction to appearance and in the other to the pure activity of spiritual life. In one direction, that which can be known, that which receives the action of the idea, and in the other, that which outruns it in its ceaseless spiritual activity. In the cinema books, Deleuze refers us to the process of crystallization and to the crystal image. This is not a function of the mind, but an objective function of some images. A perfect crystal image arises when two mirrors face off, mise en abîme, wherein the virtual image becomes real and the actual becomes virtual. Deleuze calls the crystal image the op-sign, and in film it affects a character who is subject so strongly to something visual that they do not act, and so perception, action, and thought are broken apart, disrupting habitual repetitions in the same way as certain mosaics that form regular but non-repeating patterns, Penrose styles. These formations applied to the brain are subtle and subtly creative. Deleuze may have derived this concept of the crystal image from a 1969 film, The Structure of Crystals, by Polish filmmaker Krzysztof Zanussi, in which two scientists who are friends reconnect. I keep losing my place, sorry. I have to go back down to the bottom. Almost. Okay. Sorry. Deleuze may have derived this concept of the crystal image from a 1969 film, The Structure of Crystals, by the Polish filmmaker Krzysztof Zanussi, in which two scientists who are friends reconnect after a separation of several years. One is a noted crystallographer, and the other has left the university to work as a rather humble weatherman and to live in the country with his wife, who is a school teacher. In a crystal, atoms are ordered in repeating patterns, but depending on the chemical composition, they have different symmetries. The life of the country scientist Jan and his wife Anna appears at first to be ordered and repetitive, lacking any element of innovation. Yet it's clear both of them enjoy this molecular way of living, as Jan has taken up this life on purpose after a serious climbing accident that left him impaired for 6 months. On the molar scale, Jan and Anna's life may appear repetitive and boring, yet a closer look reveals that they share scientific and intellectual curiosity, intimacy, and a generally happy life. Interestingly, this scenario seems to be close to the recent scientific discovery of so-called time crystals, quantum systems in which two connected systems are stuck in an endless loop, and yet their symmetry is broken. The same sequence does not produce the same result. Time crystals succeed because they are the in the lowest energy state and continue their loop until they interact with the environment. If this describes the life of Jan and Anna, it seems that their creative life is not extensively high-speed and erratic, or perhaps not at all. But nor is it an effect of a deranged state of mind. After all, the supermultitudinous continuum is so great that for Peirce, it is all that is possible not only in the brain, but in the cosmos. Like an artist, poet, scientist, or philosopher, Jan and Anna discern behind the molar scale a molecular immaterial universe. They live in a manner where their actions are not so much chosen as they are a response to life lived as pure sensibility, the unthought that Deleuze claims forces us to think. For Deleuze, this life is a work of art. It lacks all the tricks of a filmmaker, but is intensively creative. In a previous work, The Universal, I argued for something I called the slowdown, against what I understood to be Deleuze's call for infinite speeds, the condition of escape from habitual perceptual norms. Yet here it is. Passivity, diffusion, and the slowdown may keep one from being absorbed into the high-speed molar state, thereby awakening a perspective, a point of view shared by nothing and no one. As I observed in that book, quote, if you do not instantaneously perceive, conceive, and act on what interests you, your conventional responses, your responsibilities, or your important works, or on a less coarse level, if you, meaning what is provisionally you, were not simply enveloped by the myriad forces competing to compose you, then you may have entertained an interval in which to contemplate and to pose a question from out of your own duration, end quote. This may be the situation of Jan and Anna, a crystallization, a life that is a work of art. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very,
Can you turn up your volume a little so I can hear?
Ahora sí? Okay.
Thank you.
It was on from here and off from there, and you didn't hear the applause.
I understand.
Huge.
I understand.
Don't worry about it. So, thank you very much for your conference. It was very, very interesting. So, we open now the floor. Abrimos un poco el piso para... ¿Vos estás con YouTube también, Choco? ¿Alguien está con...? Si alguien puede mirar YouTube, a ver si tenemos preguntas allí. Pero bueno, si alguien tiene ganas de empezar aquí en el... Gonza, con la continuidad no tenés nada.
Okay, good. Takes a minute to formulate a question.
¿Vos quieren que empiece yo? Mientras vos pensás. Okay, I will start because we are thinking.
Oh, I can see. We are thinking. Which is why I love talking to you.
There is.
By the way, I can hear an echo.
You can't hear me?
I can hear an echo when I speak. You probably know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sí, cuando ella habla tiene un eco, dice. We are fixing it now. There.
Well, it gives people a time. It's good.
We cover. ¿Qué hago yo? Pero ella dice que ella escucha el eco. Cuando ella habla. Okay. Okay, we can do it. So, very interesting. I like a lot this relation between chaos, catastrophe, and creation, the risk of creation, and also how we are also close of this catastrophe, also regarding memory. And I feel that you think, and we share the thought, that in the crystal image we could find some kind of way out of this paradox. But I would like to ask you about, in the beginning, I felt that, and you said something about that, that you think that this risk of catastrophe is what we are living in our politically in our countries. You with Donald Trump, here with Milei.
Yeah, that guy, yeah. I know.
A lot of Brazilians here in this conference that have also experienced the experience of catastrophe with Bolsonaro. So what I would like to ask you is, in one side, how do you, if you can develop on this political relation between this chaos and catastrophe, and if you can also develop a little this kind of hope, and that I hope you try to introduce in the end of a creation that is not only philosophical or artistic, but also in a way political, to get out of this feeling of catastrophe that we are sharing.
So this is the catastrophe. This is the simplest one, right? And you can see how easily one can fall from there all the way through to, and each of these other places on the sheet of paper represent different political positions. But even in this simplest catastrophe, which is the one that occurs most often in political and social situations, because more complex catastrophes require more dimensions. And this one can be done very easily in the dimensionality that we normally inhabit. So what is typical of happening is that, according to John Cassidy, who develops this theory, one can most easily go, it's very easy to go from a stable liberal democracy through this fall into the most radical kind of catastrophic, unstable type of politics. This can happen, of course, in society among social groups as well. Things fall apart. It's much more than what was it Yeats said? It's much more than the center not holding. It's much more complex than that, right? It's a question of all of these different possible political positions represented by different points on this paper being bypassed into a tremendous instability. Sometimes when I give these talks about creation and innovation, especially grad students will come to me and they'll say, "Oh, I'm trying so hard to do something new." And I tell them that there isn't a path for this, and that most of what they believe may provide them with new insights. It's something Deleuze, for example, is powerfully opposed to. And I think it may have been because of Bergson's extensive work on mental states, which Bergson was absolutely fascinated by studying. It may have been that his reading of Bergson's account of various mental states convinced him of some of this. So, It's not. Yes, go ahead.
Translate this part or try to translate this part and then we...
Okay, please, go ahead.
Bueno, esto exige memoria, traducción simultánea, todas facultades de las cuales yo carezco, pero voy a tratar de hacerlo mejor de mí. Bueno, entonces, la pregunta había sido sobre el aspecto político de la catástrofe y, bueno, y si hacia un lado optimista. Hasta ahora estamos por el lado, la respuesta llegó al lado de la catástrofe política y lo que ella mostraba era el ejemplo de una hoja de papel donde la catástrofe justo consistía, era una forma muy simple que consistía en la desaparición de las dos opiniones, que no son dos opiniones en conflicto, sino que el ejemplo de la hoja mostraba cómo se borraban todas las opiniones. Y lo que dice es que este ejemplo es simple, pero es bueno porque en la política es lo mismo, que el pasaje desde una democracia estable hacia una catástrofe radical, inestable, un tipo de política catastrófica, radical, inestable, es abrupto, es muy simple y muy veloz, que no exige muchas transiciones o un largo proceso. Entonces, además dice que esta catástrofe es mucho más compleja que esta idea de no se sostiene el centro. Es algo mucho más terrible que simplemente que hay algo que sostenía y que de pronto no sostiene. Y bueno, luego ya ha empezado a meterse con el tema de la creación, con la creación de lo nuevo, y empezaba a plantear cómo justamente Deleuze siempre había pensado que el acceso a la posibilidad de creación y creación de lo nuevo era algo que estaba también mucho más cerca de lo que esperamos, si es que entendí esta última parte correctamente. ¿Sí?
So this is not, I do not want to give the impression that this is not a call against protest. Okay, I live in Athens part of the year, and every week there's a protest, usually several, very active. Most recently from farmers who were really disgusted with the government treatment, also from university students who were opposed to the government allowing private universities to set up operations in Greece. Just, you know, that's just two small things that are constantly there that have been there for the last 6 months or a year. Especially the last 6 months. So it's not that one shouldn't protest, but then the question is, you know, where do the new ideas come from? That's the question. Where do the ideas come from? And, you know, especially, I've just finished writing an encyclopedia article which I hope will be published on the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy on postmodernism. And part of what annoys me about the way postmodernism has been treated by the politically oriented speakers who want to use it as a whipping post, right? Who think that they can dump all the problems on the head of postmodernism, is that, you know, it's a very carefully conceived and carried out set of ideas. You know, when I read not just Baudrillard, not just the postmodern condition, but the differend, right? The differend. That book, and then after that, Baudrillard's book, and then my own background, I'm very familiar with the architecture and the especially women artists who were part of strong elements in that postmodern movement. It's about ideas, right? They're proposing ideas to break down the monolith of modernist unification. They're not out to destroy the world. They're seeking a way to have a voice. And sometimes one has to do it in a very, you know, at my university, it's taken me 30 years to achieve this distinguished professor. And even so, I'm only the first woman to ever get it. 30 years. So The problem with politics is that we give up very easily. The problem with social change is we give up very easily. We want something catastrophic to happen that will change everything, like waving a magic wand. Be careful what you wish for, right? You and we in this country and you in your country, you know only too well.
Entonces, la idea en esta segunda parte fue, por un lado, hizo una diferencia importante entre las protestas, señaló algunas protestas que están teniendo lugar en Estados Unidos, pero lo que señaló no es el tema de la protesta, sino qué ideas están detrás de la protesta. Y dijo que estas ideas tardan mucho en hacerse, que hay un tema con la precipitación. Entonces dio el ejemplo de los derechos de la mujer, los 30 años que le llevó a ella poder acceder a un cargo que es poco disponible para las mujeres en su universidad. Y entonces creo que la idea central es que hay que hacer ideas y que esas ideas llevan mucho tiempo. Y que justamente esta idea de la catástrofe tiene que ver con esta cuestión de algo ya, algo rápido, algo con lo que ya tenemos sin desarrollar el pensamiento antes, que creo que fue uno de los temas del conversatorio de política de ayer, y que lo que justamente, una de las cosas que estamos viendo en nuestros países, Estados Unidos y acá, ella considera que uno de los problemas que está atrás de Trump y de Milei, si sigo bien el razonamiento, es justamente esta ansiedad, solución ya, con lo que ya disponemos, protestamos, y detrás tiene que haber ideas, lo cual es muy bueno, porque le da un lugar muy interesante a la filosofía en el cambio social. Bueno,
Thank you.
Hello, Dorothea. How are you doing?
I'm good. Hello, how are you? It's so lovely to see you.
You too, and to hear you. I really loved everything you said.
Thank you.
So I'm still thinking. I don't know if I can formulate exactly what I want to ask, but it goes by the concept of the determination and the indeterminacy. You know, because this whole epistemological field that you referred at the beginning of your talk, you know, this mathematics of complex systems and dynamical systems, with this idea that you can map a system with a set of variables, and you can calculate trajectory, but if that trajectory goes to some parameters, then the whole system goes crazy, and you know, and everything gets chaotic, and our tools to calculate what will happen next become useless, you know. And one can say, well, that's a problem of our way to conceptualize what's happening there, you know, our limited cognitive systems, our limited mathematical concepts cannot arrive to understand the complexity, but maybe if we had, you know, supercomputers or something like that, we would eventually reach that modern dream of the absolutely determined, the absolute determination, where everything in the universe is determined. I think that Deleuze's philosophy and what you were also what you were talking about shows that there is a more complex play in between the undetermined and the determination, and that maybe what is more valuable about Deleuze's philosophy, but that it's still something that it's a task that is open, is to elaborate ways for us to learn how to live in between that space, between the absolutely undetermined chaos, because when Deleuze says chaos, he doesn't mean the absolute
Yes,
contingency,
I
don't
know.
know, maybe Meyasu would think later that everything is possible. Well, not everything is possible, depending on what point of the system you are. And I was thinking, for example, in this catastrophe theory, that René Thom developed, he was later followed by some mathematicals, some topologists who wanted to apply that model to everything. And for example, they took the catastrophe to explain, for example, when can a riot emerge in a prison? You analyze the system of the prison, you have these variables, and you can calculate what happens exactly in every moment, and which parameters can vary, which variations on which parameters can cause the catastrophe, and we can determine it absolutely even when a riot can occur. And of course, they were very criticized for that thesis, So, well, as you see, I don't have a formulation really clear, but my question was on that line, how you see the relationship between determinism and indeterminism.
Sure, of course.
And also, if I heard you correctly, you said you skipped a point on neurosciences. I heard you right, because I see there another example of this complexity of mathematics that is applied to explain the mind, and there are schools there that think that mental phenomenon can be absolutely explained in the calculus of the chemical components of the brain and all that, So, and that also plays a role in politics, in ethics, in not only in epistemology, So, well,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, a simple question. Thanks.
So I will translate my question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please.
Okay, no, so you can answer, and then I will try and
But
translate.
do you want to translate the question first?
Yes.
No? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. And let's see, as we say in Greek. Okay.
For the chaos of the question, but anything you can say
All right,
will be
well,
okay.
let me focus a little bit on something that's really interesting and valuable. First of all, you miss nothing by not reading the section on neuroscience, because I looked at several psychological studies that were studying innovation, and they came up with nothing, zero, absolutely nothing. Essentially, it was undefinable, which I thought was hilarious, which is why I enjoyed including that section in the paper. More philosophical neuroscience, right? That's a different question. Yes, I agree with you. There are those people who, reductivists like Chalmers and people like that. And I've spent a good deal of the last 10 years trying to find ways to refute that. One of the most interesting ways is precisely with the idea of complexity. And complexity is actually an idea that was taken out of biology. One of the foremost evolutionary biologists, Stuart Kaufman, is one of the sort of originators of complexity theory at the Santa Fe Institute, along with many others. And it included computer scientists. And the important reason why the Santa Fe Institute complexity studies included computer scientists, some really good ones, is because it cannot be modeled mathematically. And so the closest you can get to modeling complexity, biological complexity, is to use computer models, because they can operate in increased numbers of dimensionality, whereas you hit a limit with mathematics. So that again shows the limits of purely mathematical attempts, reductivism, let's just call it that, or mathematical determinism. Another interesting aspect about complexity theory is that I have just read a book that one of my students recommended by a physicist who worked with Stephen Hawking in his last 10 or 15, 20 years, actually, called The Origin of Time. And this, too, is also using two really interesting things. One, Hannah Arendt's critique of the annex of the, what is it? I'm sorry, I've got too many ideas in my head, of the idea of understanding, making sense of reality from as far away a position as you possibly can. So uses that and instead focuses on what they call the observer, which does in fact include us. It's not anthropological, it's not that theory, but nonetheless, the observer has to be included. Obviously, then it's quantum, right? And is also using this idea of complexity, which originated, evolutionary complexity, which originated in biology and then was modeled again by the computer scientists, and Hawking and his co-worker, the scientist who worked with him, the cosmologists who worked with him, were trying to develop a way of talking, of thinking about this, writing about this using quantum theory. And it appears from, if I've understood this book correctly, it's fairly difficult, even though it's written for people like me. They are on their way, and the structure they are using to make sense of it is holograms. So maybe some of you already know all of this, and don't ask me to explain how the holograms work. I'm still trying to figure that out. So what I want to say is that part of the problem is that our ideas were too narrow. Our ideas were so focused, right? Our ideas are so focused on either disaster or order, right? On the one hand, you have order, and on the other hand, you have, complete disaster. I'm not even going to use the word catastrophe because I think it's a misuse of it to some extent to use it in a negative way. So that's where, that's how we like to think in terms of those binaries. And at some point in the paper, I presented a series of these binaries, but what happens is they are two sides of the same image, right? And so their binary nature is far less exclusionary than we think. I suspect that in quantum theory, entanglement is a very similar concept. And that says that as hard as you try to break things apart, you cannot break everything apart. It's not doable. It's not workable. You can cause, however, quite a bit of destruction, if you do not carefully engineer whatever structure it is you're working with. There can be quite a bit of destruction, as we know, politically, socially, economically.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. You were going to say something else, or?
No,
okay,
no,
okay.
That's enough.
Thank you very much. Entonces, bueno, lo que le pregunté a Dorothea fue, ella trajo al principio esta cuestión de las matemáticas de la complejidad, y mi pregunta apuntaba un poco en general a la cuestión de cómo ve ella la relación entre el determinismo y lo indeterminado, o la indeterminación, que es una oposición filosófica de larga data, en un montón de teorías epistemológicas, éticas, políticas, ¿no? Y que cuando se mete la matemática en el medio del discurso filosófico, por ahí en general uno lo lee como una cuestión de que se sigue una línea del determinismo, ¿no? Que incluso estas matemáticas de la complejidad uno podría decir, bueno, son teorías que formulan un sistema muy complejo en este lenguaje matemático, pero que si tuviéramos matemáticas mejores o mejores formas de calcular, podríamos llegar a determinar todo absolutamente. Entonces, bueno, la pregunta iba un poco por ahí. Dorothea me respondió que esta teoría de la complejidad no es originalmente matemática, sino que viene de la biología y de la computación, ¿no? De la cibernética, que los científicos que laburan con esto, en general de manera multidisciplinar, arman modelizaciones computacionales de cómo varían los sistemas, que no se pueden reducir a un vocabulario netamente matemático. Me mencionó el ejemplo de, por ejemplo, un ayudante de Stephen Hawking, no sé si era cosmólogo o algo así, que en sus estudios sobre física del tiempo, del universo, usa, por ejemplo, teorías de Hannah Arendt, que no llegué a entender bien de qué libro estaba hablando ahí o de qué teoría, pero como señalando esa interrelación entre ciencias, y terminó, bueno, diciendo esto de que solemos entender de manera muy binaria la cuestión de determinismo o indeterminismo, o de caos y orden, ¿no? Para ponerlo en términos políticos, y de que de lo que se trata y de que estas teorías se va tratando de pensar es de que no son dos dimensiones totalmente heterogéneas o totalmente contrapuestas, que cuando está la una no está la otra, sino de que lo interesante pasa en el medio, en el entrelazamiento de los dos planos. Así que,
What I would like to say, it's the Archimedean point that I was trying to talk about. And also I just add that this is what really irritates me about the fantasies of AI, when in really to understand ourselves and our universe better, we really need to focus on complexity theory, because it offers us the most options for creating new ideas.
bueno, y ahora agrega un punto que me parece muy interesante, que ahora hay mucho revuelo y mucha esperanza en torno a las teorías de la inteligencia artificial, o podemos agregar ahí los algoritmos y todo eso, ¿no? Como que desarrollando eso puede estar la respuesta a todos los problemas humanos, ¿no? Se escucha esto de que ahora las inteligencias artificiales pueden ayudar a soluciones políticas y cosas así, y lo que dice Dorothea es que tendríamos que concentrarnos más en la teoría de la complejidad, que eso sería mucho más interesante en términos de encontrar soluciones creativas a las cuestiones. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we are sadly in time, but it was very great, but not so good, because seeing you makes me miss you more, so not so good in that point. But it was great to be able to discuss. I'm very interested in this new development, so I'm looking forward to your book. And let's keep in touch, and I hope we will be to see all together in presence soon. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for your words and your questions. And I will work hard to try to be there next year in December. Thank you. Bye. Ciao.
See you soon.